6.
Hi, everybody. I'm Chelsea Clinton, author of She Persisted Around the World, and I'm so grateful to be here this afternoon with Dr. Susan Newman of NYU and one of really the world's leading experts on early childhood education and why it is so important we surround all children with kind of language-rich, literacy-rich, book-rich environments. And I just am really looking forward to our conversation this afternoon and signing some books along the way. So, Susan, thank you so much.
Oh, it's delightful to be here. So last night I read this book again, and I thought it was just wonderful. And I wanted to know, why did you write it?
So the first She Persisted book I wrote really for 2 reasons. I wrote kind of out of a particular moment in our history a couple of years ago when She Persisted became a real rallying cry for so many women, and to be fair, some men too, to better kind of support and celebrate and listen to and respect women. And I also wrote the first book because at the time I had 2 kids who were even younger than they are now, and I realized how many of our children's books are centered around and often told from the perspective of boys or male voices, how even so many of the books that are about animals are still told from the perspective of like boy animals. And I wanted to celebrate some of the women who had meant so much to me throughout my life and to share those stories with my kids and young readers. And so I wrote the first She Persisted, and then thankfully, because that resonated with people, I had the chance to share 13 more stories of women who mean so much to me, kind of with She Persisted Around the World.
Well, one of the things I noticed is I learned a lot, which was
good.
great.
Oh,
yeah.
good.
And I learned that, I didn't realize that women have won the Nobel Peace Prize. They've done enormous things. How did you choose these particular women?
So for She Persisted Around the World, while there were some women I knew I wanted to include, including the great environmentalist Wangari Maathai, who is someone I've looked up to for more than 25 years, who was, like you, a professor in her native Kenya at the University of Nairobi, and really kind of revolutionized what we thought was possible in environmental activism. She founded the Green Belt movement that today has planted more than 53 million trees to fight deforestation across Kenya and East Africa. And so I knew I wanted to include her. I knew I wanted to include her kind of fellow Nobel Peace Prize winner, Lema Bowie, the great Liberian peace activist. And yet I knew there would be so many women whose stories I didn't know. So I reached out to kind of friends and colleagues who'd kind of grown up and lived and worked around the world. My wonderful editor, Jill Santopolo, reached out to her kind of friends and colleagues around the world, and we got hundreds of suggestions. And so that was such a gift to me because I got to read through those suggestions and then kind of think about which really kind of struck me in a positive, affirmative, inspiring sense. And I limited myself to kind of 1 woman per country so I could talk about 13 women from 13 different countries. And so many of these women I think weren't well known, and I hope that now all of them are going to become more well known and will be as inspiring to readers of every age as they are to me.
Well, I was very interested as an early literacy person in the word you use, she persisted. Tell me why you chose that word. Is that word especially important to you?
It is important to me. Even before it became a rallying cry a couple of years ago, I've long believed that persistence is kind of a core value for anyone in life, to help us be the people that we want to be as kids, as students, as friends, later as kind of adults and colleagues, as parents, as friends. I think persistence is helping us hopefully to always become the person we want to be. That every day hopefully kind of we become a better version of ourselves. Because I think we all have to kind of be vulnerable and open to learning and evolving throughout our lives, and yet kind of persisting kind of toward hopefully always more kind of love and kindness in the world.
One of the things I loved about this book is I imagined myself having a conversation with my grandkids about these people and using it as a way of having a wonderful conversation. Did you think about that when you were writing this book?
I definitely thought about my own kids, my daughter and my son, because I think it's equally important that we share stories of kind of strong, powerful, persistent women with our daughters and our sons, so that our daughters can imagine themselves as activists and artists, athletes, advocates, anything kind of that these women do in She Persisted and She Persisted Around the World and so much else. And also equally that our sons see their sisters, their friends, girls everywhere as having dreams that are just as valuable and just as valid as their own. So absolutely I thought about kind of how these stories hopefully could help close that imagination gap for kids and also really be conversation starters.
So I was thinking as I was reading this that there are lessons for men, right? And little boys in this very important book. What kind of message would you want to send to our little boys and men?
Well, I hope that young boy readers, and I feel so strongly as the mother of a boy, and also the mother of a girl, that I hope little boys who read these stories are as kind of inspired by these women as little girls are, and see the value and the equal value of listening to and amplifying women's voices and celebrating women's stories. And I have to say, clearly I didn't write this story, but I do love right now that my son is kind of right alongside my daughter in loving Wonder Woman. That if you asked him like who's his favorite superhero of the moment, I think he would definitely say Wonder Woman. And nothing against Batman, but I am thrilled that Wonder Woman, at least at the moment, has supplanted Batman as his favorite superhero.
Very cool.
Yes.
So I have a feeling that She Persisted is going to be another version. I know that over 1,000 books have been already sold, and you're going to sign some more. But do you already have another third She Persisted in mind?
I am working on another book, which I'm really excited about, even though before that I have a book about endangered species coming out next month, which I'm really excited to be able to share. Another kind of deep passion of mine is trying to save the African elephant and help save other endangered species, because I don't want any child to grow up in a world without these magnificent creatures, and we know how important saving endangered species is to helping the health of our environment. And I think we both have to kind of combat climate change and fight climate change in radical ways, and we also have to work to save our core species in radical ways. And I want kids to understand kind of why I think these questions are so urgent, but also to feel like they can be connected to the solution. So I'm really excited to share that next month.
Oh, that's wonderful. So we're going to go and start signing books and answering questions. But I just wanted to say that I encourage teachers to work and use this book. I think it's such an important lesson for these children to hear in the classroom as well. So I know you designed it for parent and child, but I think it's a wonderful opportunity for teachers.
Well, and it actually has been, Susan, I have heard from teachers that they have found kind of the books to be useful in their classroom. And as someone who loved my elementary school teachers, I'm still in touch with my first grade teacher, Mrs. Mitchell, as an example. That means so much to me. And I also love when teachers or parents or grandparents share pictures of their kids, their students, dressed as their favorite characters in the books. Also just kind of gives me so much joy and gratitude.
Oh, that's wonderful. So why don't you start signing?
Sure.
That'd be great.
Yeah, Susan, you have to tell me what I need to do, since you're our moderator. You know kind of more about what we're supposed to be doing along the way.
Well, I know that you're supposed to be signing books for people, and I want to remind fans, premiercollectibles.com/Chelsea Clinton, and this is where you can get your signed copies, right?
Great, thank you, Susan.
Great. So I have some questions
Okay.
as you
Please.
start signing. So these are questions from other people who have asked about them.
Okay, great.
And so what advice would you give a young girl growing up in today's social climate?
Oh, well, I think about this a lot.
Uh-huh.
Partly because I'm lucky enough to do work with organizations like the Girl Scouts that were so important to me and to my confidence as a young girl, and I think about this a lot as a parent. I would say some of the best advice, though, that I got from my mom when I was little, and I kind of continued, thankfully, to hear it while growing up, is kind of two things are important when we think about kind of living in the world, whether that's the world of our family or the world of our school or the kind of social media world. To take serious criticism from serious people seriously.
Mm-hmm.
So that I always listened to my grandmothers when they gave me feedback. I always listened to my mom when she told me I had to clean my room. I always listened to my teachers when they gave me feedback on my writing, which I'm now as an author so thankful for. It's also important to not listen to unserious criticism from unserious people, from the people who just want to tear you down, from the people who just want to stereotype you, from the people who just want to bully you, from the people who just want to diminish you, whether those sadly are your teachers sometimes, if you're not lucky enough as I was to have good teachers, if it's sometimes sadly your so-called friends or kind of other kids in school. And so to not make ourselves totally hardened to kind of helpful, constructive, affirmative feedback, but to make ourselves hardened to the not constructive, not nice, mean feedback, because we don't need that.
Right.
Nobody needs that.
No one needs that.
Nobody needs that.
Right. I totally agree with you. And it says that we cannot be so vulnerable that we listen to voices that are not helpful to us, right?
No.
Yeah.
But to listen to the voices, sometimes even if they're hard to hear, that we really could learn something from.
Yeah, yeah. Sometimes those lessons aren't easy, right?
No.
I remember being a student teacher and having someone say, "You're not doing very well." And I went back and I cried and I felt bad, but then I learned, right?
And you got better, I'm sure.
I got better.
Yeah.
I became a good teacher. So, of course, this question you get all the time. I'm sure you know.
I don't know.
and that
You'll
is-
ask it, I'll tell you.
Will you run for public office?
Oh, you're right, Susan. I do get asked this question a lot.
Right.
And I've been asked this question truly almost my whole life. I mean, I remember being a little girl and someone at a rally for my dad when he was running for re-election as governor of Arkansas asking me if I was going to run for governor of Arkansas one day. And right now the answer to that question for me is no. And yet I think that every person who cares about our world and our communities should be asking ourselves that question, because there are more than 1 million offices you could run for in the United States. School board, city council, county board, sheriff, district attorney, judge, state legislator, attorney general, lieutenant governor, governor, comptroller, state treasurer, kind of for the Congress, the Senate, clearly the presidency. And so I hope that anyone who cares about what's happening in our country thinks about kind of a few questions like, do I have a clear vision of what I do in this office, whether that's the school board or the Senate? Do I think I have the right skills to be able to try to achieve that vision? And is it the right time for me and my family to kind of go into the public arena in that way? And I think you have to believe you do a better job than whomever's in that office at the moment or whoever else is running. And so right now, the reason I say no is because, outside of the president, I really am excited about my leadership. Here in New York City, my congresswoman, my senators, and I'm grateful to the people, who I could and have voted for, who I think are doing a good job on behalf of the world that I want to grow up in with my kids and grow old in. But if that were to change, I'd have to ask, those questions that I shared with you. But right now, no, I'm really thankful to be able to do work that I love and get to write books that I'm grateful to be able to do, and to share those books with kids and their families and teachers and others around the country.
Yeah, and you're making a difference. You're
I hope
making
so.
a difference,
I
which
hope
is so critically important. Yeah.
I hope so.
Right.
Yeah, well, thank you, Susan.
So what's the biggest challenge, do you think, you've had in the workplace?
Oh, goodness. Well, I'm also a teacher.
Mm-hmm.
And
Which is a wonderful endeavor.
I love teaching. I love teaching kind of my graduate public health students at Columbia. And last night I got to lecture to
You
some
gotta come to NYU.
undergraduates, and I really love that. I have worked really hard on my teaching, and I've also had to work on understanding how it's different sometimes when I'm giving a lecture for an hour versus when I'm teaching for 3 hours. And those have different, I think, disciplines. Different when I'm expected to have like slide presentations, or when I'm just giving a straight lecture. And so I think in some ways over the last, goodness, I guess, 7 years since I started teaching,
Wow.
you know, I've had to really work on, and I've gotten lots of great constructive feedback from, you know, my department chair and colleagues about hopefully how to be effective in different lecture formats, in different class sizes. And it's been really challenging in the best sense and really affirming. And I just am so thankful it's something that I get to do along with all my work at the Clinton Foundation and my writing.
Right, right. It is a wonderful job. I've been doing it for 30 years, I think, and I still love it.
And
right?
if you have any tips, I'd love to hear those too. Truly, I'm constantly trying to be
I'm always interested in
learning.
what the students have to say. So,
Yeah, thankfully, I think my students are generally, knock on wood, pretty happy, but I've had to work really hard to get to that place.
Yeah, yeah. So, someone says, so this is a question that...
Sure.
Yeah. Thank you for staying classy.
Oh.
Isn't that an interesting term? How do you do it?
I believe kindness is really important, and I think particularly now. Oh yes, thank you, Susan. I'll take some more of those
I'm
books.
pushing
Thank
these
you.
along.
And I just, you know, I think we have to call out and name hate when we see it, or you know, carelessness when we see it, and kind of all of these challenges that we have right now in our country, particularly given our president, who I am like actively, I think every day in disagreement and opposition to, and yet I refuse to be degraded by how so often he, the president, and others around him engage in the world. Like, just because they're racist, xenophobic, you know, white nationalists who are, I think, doing very destructive things to our country, I think we can name all of that, and the anti-Semitism and Islamophobia and homophobia and sexism and so much that seems to animate and drive their rhetoric and their policy decisions. And I think it is important that we call that out, without, though, falling into kind of the personal attacks that they often also seem to fall into, and the kind of personally demeaning language. And I think, you know, particularly for women who are in the public domain, whether that's women in politics or women in the news media or kind of women artists and activists, you know, actors and advocates who are kind of in the public domain, so often we're targeted for our appearance. And that's often the way in which critics, I think, try to lessen us or demean us. And I understand why so many people find that really painful and hurtful. I think because I grew up with all of that, and kind of people saying those things to me, even when I was a little girl, I realized that was about them and not about me. And so I just always feel so sad for someone when that is kind of the way in which they're engaging in the world. And I used to ignore all of it, and now I still ignore most of it. But I do respond to some of it, because I think it is important that we shine a light and say, you know, this is happening, you know, not just under the surface, but sometimes actively. And we can respond with kindness, even to things that are personally ugly. And we can respond kind of with facts and science and data and kindness when things are not scientific, not data-driven, kind of driven by, I certainly believe, kind of a hateful place so often in our country. And I think it's important that we do that. It's not something I think anyone could do all day, every day, because we have other work to do in the world, whether that's writing or teaching, spending time with our family and our friends. But I do think it's important that we do engage positively, productively, kind of from a place of kindness, not as weakness, but as strength, at least some of the time.
So to follow that up,
Sure.
This is a hard time for many teachers as a result of some of the things that you said. What would you say to teachers? How to school their children under such a condition?
Well, we know we have exploding rates of bullying in our country, and some of this certainly predates the last few years. Although I think it's been exacerbated in the last few years.
And the
data shows that. So the data shows that more schools and more teachers are reporting students who are using the president's words to bully kids kids who are not able-bodied, disabled children, kids of color, girls.
Or special education
students. So many students are being actively bullied kind of in ways that are using the president's words. And I think every teacher has the responsibility, and every school district has the responsibility and the obligation to ensure that there's never a place for that. There should be no place for bigotry in our schools. And I think that has to be an uncompromising position.
Right.
And I think it has to be addressed and not left to fester. And I think, I know there's a lot of talk right now around what is free speech? And I don't think hate speech is free speech. And I think schools also have a responsibility to help teach kids how to think about kind of things critically and engage constructively, and is also to recognize that hate speech is not an opinion, right? It's just hate.
Teach kindness and character.
And actively teach kindness, and actively teach what it means to be an ally and to show solidarity and to not be a bystander and to stand up safely, always safely, and yet also consistently to bullying.
So I think I know the answer to this question because I read who the book was dedicated to, but who other than your parents really inspired you?
So I dedicate the book to my grandmother, my mom's mom, who was a huge part of my life. She lived with my family for the last years of her life, and I spoke to her every day in the last years of her life, and I'm so grateful that she was my grandmother and that she was in my life for 31 years, and I very much wish she was still here. She just was always, she gave great advice and she gave great hugs. She was kind of unflinching in her honesty, so she always told me exactly what she felt about everything, but always from a place of kindness. And she had a mantra that life is about what happens to you. It's not about what happens to you, it's about what you do with what happens to you, and I think about that a lot.
So I can imagine her hugging you and reading this book right now, right?
She gave the best hugs.
Really? Yeah. So, what career would you have if you didn't do what you were doing now?
Oh my goodness. I don't know the answer to that. Maybe.
I have to push these.
Oh yes, thank you. I love teaching at the university level, but if I didn't, maybe I would be, a high school teacher, a middle school teacher, an elementary school teacher, right? I love being. I love being a teacher, and I love the students I teach now. But I think if I couldn't do that for some reason, I would probably still look to teach. And
Teaching.
I love writing the books I write now, but if for some reason I couldn't do this, I think I would still look for ways to write. And I'm so thankful for all the work that I get to do around kind of global health and the health of kids here in the United States. But if I weren't kind of able to do that, I think I'd probably focus, perhaps not on our work around early literacy, but around, I don't know, building libraries. I would just try to keep doing kind of, the things I know that I love to do and that I'm grateful to be able to do. But if for some reason I couldn't do those things, I would try to find ways to kind of still take my passion, my energy, I hope my talents, in kind of related and productive ways.
So do you think you're going to write a book for adults?
I hope to at some point, yes. I hope to. Stay tuned.
Yeah,
stay tuned.
Stay tuned. So what is your favorite way, this is an interesting question, what is your favorite way to teach your children the value of inclusion?
It's a great question. We talk about everything at hopefully an age-appropriate way. We talk about, my husband comes from a family of, a blended family of kind of Jewish and Catholic, Vietnamese American, and so I think particularly we teach them to really listen to their cousins who are having different experiences in the world than they are. We teach them to listen to their friends who are having different experiences because of the color of their skin, or because they're not kind of living in the United States, kind of at the same level of very clear privilege our kids have, to listen to their friends who have disabilities about kind of what that means. And even though they're 2 and 4, I think teaching them to recognize that they're, yes, the center of my universe, but not the center of the universe, and that they are deeply privileged in so many ways, and kind of they have a responsibility to try to, I believe, kind of give away that privilege and erode that privilege, and kind of to listen to people who have different life experiences, to kind of be aware of kind of what it means to be a citizen. And so we also talk about what's happening in our country, and we talk about, well, particularly with my daughter who's almost 4 and a half, the horror of the child separations at the border, and she'd say, like, that's awful and that's wrong. I say, that's right, that is awful and wrong, because I want them to understand kind of in the world of their own lives, their own experiences, kind of with their family, with their friends, kind of with our community here in New York and more broadly, but also kind of what it means to be a citizen. Just to be thinking about that already, and to feel a responsibility already, to be a good person and to be engaged, and to not be blinded to their own privilege, and yet to feel a responsibility, kind of from an early age, because I think it's never too early to start. Basically.
I so disagree. So here's a wonderful question. I'm going to push some more
thank you,
books,
Susan.
Here. What women do you think you could be writing about in 15 to 20 years?
Oh my gosh.
Isn't that interesting from now?
Or today.
Yeah.
Right, or today. I think about how remarkable so many of our powerful young activists are today, who are, fighting gun violence and fighting for smart, sensible gun reform. The young activists who are fighting so that everyone believes climate change is urgent and an existential threat, because it is, and who are offering real solutions. The young activists in different parts of the country that are tackling the issues that are so important to them, whether that's cleaning up their local parks and their local kind of community spaces, or trying to persuade the city council to adopt housing first policies, so kind of there are no more homeless people in their city. I think we have so many examples at the kind of national and the local level of young people that are doing great things, and I've been thankful to share those stories in 2 other books I've written, It's Your World and Start Now. And so I think, if, like in 15 or 20 years, I hope to still be writing about some of those women and to learn just even more about more young people who are, in the best sense, trying to change our world for the better.
When I was young, there was this narrow band of possibility for women. I remember my own family saying, well, you couldn't possibly go to college, and now look at all the wonderful options that we have. So I think one of the things you're describing is just there's so many more opportunities than we have and will continue to have.
Well, and I think we have so many places where young people are really leading.
Right.
And I think that's really exciting.
Right.
Oh gosh, thank you, Susan.
I know.
Here,
Keeps
thank you.
Thank
Thank you.
Tired. Right. So how did living in the White House with your father as president influence your current life?
Oh, I'm sure it influenced it in ways that I
Can't even
can't even imagine,
right?
because I can't imagine my life kind of not being as it's been. I'm so grateful to my parents for doing everything they could to protect my privacy, so that I had as normal a life as possible. And they also were so welcoming to my friends and their families, so the White House very much felt like a home. I also never forgot,
right?
I also never forgot that I lived in the White House, and I felt a real responsibility to that, to be a proud part of my family's time there. And also, I didn't know, and I believe this so strongly, I didn't know Sasha and Malia Obama would live there after I would, and they were both a little kind of younger than I was, but we weren't that far apart in age.
How old were you when you first?
I was 12 when we moved into the White House, and I didn't know Barron Trump, who was a year younger than I was when he moved into the White House. And even though I disagree with his father, I think, on everything, and vehemently oppose everything this administration is doing, he's not responsible for that.
No,
and I want him to have a private childhood and kind of the right to privacy that I think every child deserves. And so I wanted to be a proud part of my family's time in the White House, but also kind of the history of kids who lived there. But the best part of the White House by far were the people who are there kind of regardless of the president. The historians, the curators, the gardeners, the arborists, the tour guides, the ushers, the chefs, everyone who helps take care of the first family, but also take care of the history of the White House. Were really part of my family growing up, and I'm so thankful.
Could you really feel the moment of history, or as a kid, were you just primarily a kid?
I think both.
Okay.
Both, yeah.
Really affected. All right, this is a question for her 8-year-old granddaughter, Abby, who persistently and bravely deals with type 1 diabetes. So, have you written at all about, I don't think this is a question as much as a comment.
In the first She Persisted book, I write about Justice Sonia Sotomayor, who also had type 1 diabetes.
She did.
As a little girl, and had to learn to navigate her type 1 diabetes, while she was working so hard in school. And she herself has written really eloquently about how when she was diagnosed with type 1 diabetes, not nearly as much as we know now was known then, and how scary it was to have this diagnosis when she didn't know anyone else kind of who had it. And that
you felt ashamed at the time, didn't you?
Well, I think thankfully, like her grandmother and her family was really supportive of her and encouraging of her. But she very much knew that if she wanted to become Perry Mason, who was a core inspiration for her. Really? She watched Perry Mason on television, and
so did we. We loved it.
She wanted to kind of be in that courtroom. That she knew she would have to manage her type 1 diabetes. And type 1 diabetes is so common in our country, and Type 2 diabetes is becoming even more common, which I know is a completely separate disease, and it's important to say that. But none of this should have any shame attached to it, Susan, as you said. And Abby, shouldn't be ashamed. She should, feel really empowered and proud of herself that she's learning how to deal with this.
She can take care of herself.
Like, she's conquering that. She's going to take care of herself. That, I would say is going to help her not only persist but achieve in life, and going to give her an advantage, because she's already had to conquer, a significant challenge at 8.
It's kind of a wonderful story, isn't it? Really?
Yeah, it's a really inspiring story.
Yeah. Let's remind people now that the signed copies are premiercollectibles.com. Chelsea Clinton. That's one word. So this book is headed for my wife's classroom. See, there are other people like me who think about teaching. So can you recall a book you read in school that influenced you and maybe even changed your life?
Oh my gosh. So in first grade, we read throughout the year The Wizard of Oz.
Oh.
And I loved Dorothy Gale. And because I loved Mrs. Mitchell, so I probably would have loved whatever chapter book that she decided we were going to
You still remember her name
together. Oh my gosh, Sadie Mitchell, now Dr. Sadie Mitchell. And I just was in awe of, I think she's 11 in the book, 11 or 12. She's younger than the movie. And
oh, that's interesting.
I just was so inspired by her story.
She persisted.
Very much so.
Right?
But I have to say probably 4th grade was the year that was really transformative for me as a reader.
Are you a good reader?
I love to read. I had Mrs. Porter in 4th grade. And we read books that I really remember for the first time were painful to read. We read The Bridge to Terabithia.
Oh, yes.
We read Where the Red Fern Grows. We read Watership Down.
Oh, my gosh.
Yeah, I know. I remember just crying a lot reading these books, but also then how powerful that was.
Right. I remember reading Velveteen Rabbit.
Oh my gosh.
I had my eyes out.
And I also had I had 2 great librarians in elementary school. And so thankfully, it wasn't all serious, even though we didn't read these books in class. I also read, Encyclopedia Brown and Nancy Drew.
Oh, wasn't that
Harriet
fun?
the Spy.
Yes.
Kind of these great fun books too. So I discovered kind of how powerful and affecting reading could be, but also really how fun it could be.
Did you go to the library a lot?
Oh my gosh, I went to the library all the time.
Really?
Both the school library and the public library, which was across the street from my church. So I went to the library, not 6 days a week probably, but at least, once during the week and once on the weekend.
I remember taking a row down at a time and just reading a row.
Well, and the school library is also, I think, or at least it's really where I remember, discovering National Geographic, back issues of National Geographic.
Unbelievable, right?
So
we get a lot of boys interested in reading as a result of National Geographic.
Well,
right?
I love National Geographic too as a girl.
Yeah, because they have fascinating stories, don't they?
Beautiful pictures and maps and so much to discover the world with.
Exactly. So it's time to play our game, and
okay.
Turns out that there's 22 questions in 2 minutes.
Oh gosh.
And what we want you to do is you want to answer what first comes to your mind.
Okay.
Are you ready?
I hope so.
Okay. Where were you born?
Little Rock, Arkansas.
Who would you want to play you in a movie?
Oh, good Lord. Well, I'm very excited about seeing the newest Marvel movie. So Brie Larson's on my mind, so I guess I'd have to say Brie Larson.
She wore a great dress, didn't she?
Oh, I don't know. I didn't see that.
Okay.
I'll check her. I'll check out the dress.
What was your first job?
A babysitter.
What was your biggest fear?
Spiders as a child.
Who made you laugh the most?
Probably my cat Socks as a kid. Socks always made me laugh a lot. Or my best friend Elizabeth.
I thought you were going to say your husband.
One of them. Well, today, sorry, I thought I was supposed to be answering these as a kid, sort of. Today, definitely my husband makes me laugh the most, or my kids.
Okay. What is the one thing you need to have in your fridge at all times?
Well, right now, as I'm pregnant, my real craving is lemonade. So lemonade.
Okay. What is your greatest accomplishment?
Well, I'm most grateful and proudest of my children.
I knew you'd say that. Who is the most interesting person you met recently?
Probably my students.
Oh,
Yeah.
that's a wonderful thing to say.
Yeah.
What is your middle name?
Victoria.
Beautiful. What is your biggest pet peeve?
People who are mean and cruel to kids.
Good. What is the last book you read?
The honest answer to that is the last book I read was The ABCs of Space last night to my son. That's the honest answer.
Left book. What is your favorite hobby?
Well, since I'm not running at the moment, and I'm not going to count spending time with my family as a hobby, reading.
Oh, good.
Yeah.
What is your guilty pleasure?
Dark chocolate.
Me too. Do you have any hidden talents?
I haven't found them yet. They're hidden from me too.
What color is your toothbrush?
Blue.
What is your secret snack?
Oh, dark chocolate probably.
How do you take your coffee?
Black.
What is the last movie you saw in theaters?
Free Solo.
Oh, interesting. It's supposed to be great.
It's amazing.
Yeah. What is the last gift you gave?
A book.
How appropriate. What cause is dear to your heart?
Anything related to kids. Trying to help kids be healthy, strong, safe, loved.
What is your number one on your bucket list?
Oh, that's a great question. I'd really like to make it to just Everest Base Camp. I don't need to go all the way to the top, but I'd like to make it to the base camp.
Yeah, that sounds good, right? And this is the last one. Where do you want to go that you've never been?
Antarctica.
Yeah, I agree. Well, it's been such a pleasure.
Thank you so much.
Yes.
Thank you very much.
Good luck.
Thank you.
Yes.
Thank you,
Love
everybody.
the book. Take care.
Thank you so much. Thank you.